ballroom glowed with gold, silver, and the heady scent of power. Outside, the city pulsed with Friday night excitement, but inside the Lenox Grand Hotel, the world belonged to Manhattan's elite. For most guests, it was the event of the season, a charity gala that promised good press and even better gossip. But for Emily Bennett, tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. Emily was 6 months pregnant, her dreams full of pastel nurseries and tiny socks. She had picked her dress weeks in advance, a shimmering blue gown that hugged her baby bump perfectly and made her feel for once like a queen. Her husband, Chase Bennett, was a rising star in the tech world, the kind of man everyone watched when he entered a room. He'd been distant lately, working late, eyes glued to his phone. But Emily told herself it was stress, the pressure of providing for their growing family. Tonight, she thought, would be different. Tonight would remind him who they were, remind him of their promises. But fate had other plans. Emily's world started to tilt the moment she arrived. The usual compliments felt forced, the smiles too quick to fade. She saw her best friend Lily across the room, radiant in red, laughing with a circle of men. Lily had always been the life of the party, gorgeous, magnetic, the sister Emily never had. They'd grown up together, shared secrets, even moved to the city as a team. Emily would have trusted her with anything. She had, in fact. Maybe that's why she missed the early signs, the late-night texts, the inside jokes, the mysterious new perfume. As the night wore on, Emily felt the baby kick and forced herself to smile. Chase was nowhere to be found. Each time she glanced at the entryway, her heart fluttered with hope, then plummeted with disappointment. At 9:23 p.m., he finally appeared. The entire ballroom seemed to pause as Chase strode in, every inch the modern prince. Black tuxedo, sharp jawline, the confidence of someone used to winning. But his hand wasn't empty. Draped on his arm, breathtaking and bold, was Lily. The world snapped into cruel focus. Chase wasn't just late. He hadn't even come with her. He had come with Lily. The whispers began instantly. Emily stood, rooted in place, feeling her face flush and her throat tighten. She watched as her husband and best friend greeted the host together, posing for photos, their laughter just a bit too intimate. Some guests glanced at Emily with pity, others with delight. It was the kind of drama this crowd lived for, a betrayal broadcast in high definition for everyone to enjoy. Someone brushed Emily's arm. "Are you all right?" a kind voice asked. She barely managed to nod. Inside, she was breaking into 1,000 sharp, glinting pieces. Every second felt like an hour. Every smile from Lily felt like a stab. Then, as if the universe wanted to make the humiliation complete, the host called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Chase Bennett." The spotlight hit Chase and Lily. Cameras flashed. Emily's vision blurred with tears. Chase grinned, pulling Lily closer. "Thank you for joining us," he said, voice smooth and unbothered. "Tonight is about new beginnings, about stepping into the future without fear." He didn't look at Emily, didn't even acknowledge her existence. For a moment the room spun. Emily could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, to throw her glass, to demand answers. But she stood there, hand on her belly, fighting to stay upright as the baby twisted inside her, reminding her she wasn't alone. Not really. People always say heartbreak feels like being stabbed. That's not true. Heartbreak is colder, slower, more suffocating. Emily felt herself splitting in two, the trusting wife who believed in forever, and the broken woman who'd just been discarded like an old party favor. Suddenly, Lily leaned over and whispered something in Chase's ear. He laughed, a deep, real laugh that Emily hadn't heard in months. The camera caught it all. Lily's hand on Chase's chest, Chase gazing down at her with adoration, the perfect picture of a couple in love. Except that woman was supposed to be Emily's best friend. That man was supposed to be Emily's husband. The shock rolled through the ballroom. Friends looked away. Strangers stared openly. Some even snapped photos on their phones, hungry for the next big scandal to post online. Emily felt naked, exposed, as if every secret fear she'd ever had was being broadcast to the world. She could almost hear the headlines, "Millionaire leaves pregnant wife for her best friend." The tabloids would eat it up. Emily's hands shook as she gripped her clutch. She tried to leave, to escape, but her feet wouldn't move. She could hear the murmurs. "Isn't she pregnant? How could he?" "I always knew Lily was trouble." The room was a blur of faces, all eyes on her, and she felt trapped, drowning in shame, anger, and disbelief. Her phone buzzed with messages. "Are you okay? Where are you?" But Emily couldn't answer. She was too busy trying not to fall apart. She thought of her baby, of the life she'd built, of all the nights she'd waited for Chase to come home. She remembered the vows they'd made, the laughter they'd shared, the hope she'd felt every time she imagined their future. Now it was all gone, destroyed in a single brutal moment. That night, Emily Bennett's fairy tale ended. But what no one in that ballroom knew, what not even Emily knew yet, was that her story was only beginning. 9 months later, the world would remember Emily for something else entirely. But for now, all she could do was fight to stay standing as her world burned down around her. Emily Bennett wasn't born into wealth, but you'd never know it by the way she carried herself. At 29, she had that gentle confidence that came from surviving more storms than anyone realized. Growing up in a tiny coastal town in Maine, Emily was the daughter of a fisherman and a school lunch lady. Life had been simple, sometimes painfully so, but it had given her an unshakable resilience, a kindness that ran deep, and a stubborn hope she'd never quite outgrown. People always said Emily was an old soul. She was the girl who brought home stray animals, who listened more than she spoke, and who always remembered birthdays, even for people who forgot hers. When she was 17, her mother died of breast cancer, and Emily took on the role of caretaker for her younger brother. The loss nearly crushed her, but it also lit a fire inside her. She would never, ever let her loved ones down. After high school, Emily put aside dreams of college to work at the local diner. She flipped pancakes by morning, changed diapers by afternoon, and read bedtime stories at night. It wasn't glamorous, but she never complained. Instead, she tucked her ambitions away, promising herself she'd chase them once her brother was old enough to stand on his own. Life, as it turned out, had different plans. By the time Emily was 21, her brother had joined the army, and Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. She moved to Boston, taking classes at a community college while waitressing at a busy cafe downtown. She discovered a love for books, for learning, for the buzz of city life. For the first time in years, she started thinking about what she wanted, not just what she needed to survive. That's when she met Lily. Lily Harrington was everything Emily wasn't: wealthy, bold, fearless, and utterly magnetic. They met in a writing workshop, and Lily, with her infectious laughter and endless energy, latched on to Emily immediately. Emily, shy and cautious, found herself swept up in Lily's world of rooftop parties and gallery openings. The two became inseparable, sisters by choice, if not by blood. Lily was the one who introduced Emily to Chase Bennett. It was at a charity event downtown, a cold night in October, the city sparkling beneath a harvest moon. Emily had been nervous, hiding behind her curls in a borrowed dress, but then Chase walked in, tall, charismatic, with a smile that could melt glaciers. He was 10 years older, already successful, already admired. And somehow, inexplicably, he noticed her. Chase was everything she'd ever dreamed of, and nothing she thought she deserved. He was gentle and attentive, remembered how she took her coffee, called just to say goodnight. For a while, Emily forgot about her own struggles. For a while, she believed in fairy tales again. They dated for 2 years. Chase proposed at the top of the Empire State Building, the city twinkling below. Emily said yes with tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching the tiny sapphire ring he'd picked because it matched your eyes. Their wedding was a simple affair, just close friends and family, laughter, music, and promises whispered in the dark. Emily traded her cafe apron for a part-time job at a local bookstore, her happy place, surrounded by stories and hope. She still sent money home to her brother when he needed it, still called her dad every Sunday. She wanted children, but Chase asked her to wait, saying, "Let's enjoy just us for a bit." She listened. She always listened. But over the years, things began to shift. Chase became busier, colder, his work swallowing up their evenings and weekends. Emily started spending more time alone, her world shrinking to the 4 walls of their downtown apartment. The woman who once dreamed of travel, of adventure, of making a difference, now spent her days tidying up and waiting for a husband who rarely came home. Her only lifeline was Lily. The two men met for coffee every week, swapped secrets, and leaned on each other when life felt too heavy. Emily trusted Lily with everything. Her doubts, her fears, her hope that Chase would come back to her. It never occurred to her that the person she trusted most could betray her so deeply. When Emily found out she was pregnant, she was terrified and overjoyed. She bought tiny socks and knit blankets, read parenting books, and left hopeful notes for Chase to find. For a moment, it seemed like their marriage might find its way back. Chase came to doctor's appointments, kissed her belly, and talked about baby names. Emily told herself everything would be all right. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Chase was distracted, distant, his eyes always somewhere else. Emily blamed herself, her insecurities spiraling. Was she not pretty enough? Not exciting enough? Not enough? Period. She started dressing up more, cooking Chase's favorite meals, pretending not to notice the lipstick stains on his collars or the perfume that wasn't hers. Emily's greatest weakness was always her heart. She loved too hard, forgave too easily, and trusted too deeply. She believed in second chances, in the goodness of people, in the power of love to fix what was broken. That was her gift and her curse. It kept her hopeful, but it also left her vulnerable, blind to the storm brewing in her own home. She didn't see the betrayal coming, not from Chase, and never from Lily. In the weeks before the gala, Emily's anxiety grew. The calls from Chase grew shorter. Lily grew more distant, too busy to meet for coffee or answer texts. Emily chalked up to her own clinginess. Maybe everyone was just busy. Maybe she was the problem. But when the truth hit, when Chase and Lily walked into the ballroom arm in arm, the whole city watching, Emily's world imploded. Now standing in the ruins of her life, Emily faces her greatest test. She is scared. She is heartbroken. She's more alone than ever, but she is still standing, and she is about to discover just how strong she truly is. The Lenox Grand Hotel didn't just host events. It created legends. Built in the roaring 1920s, its marble columns and gilded ceilings had witnessed everything from royal visits to wild celebrity scandals. Tonight, it belonged to New York's most powerful. CEOs, fashion icons, and politicians all orbiting the city's brightest social sun. The annual Winter Lights Gala was more than a party. It was a proving ground, a stage, and sometimes a battlefield. For Emily Bennett, it would become all three. The night's first snowfall sparkled under the glow of streetlights as limousines slid to a stop along the curb. Paparazzi braved the cold, hoping for that one shot, an accidental reveal, a secret whispered in a dark corner, a lover's quarrel frozen in flashbulb light. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of white roses and expensive cologne. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and tiny gold-flecked hors d'oeuvres. The orchestra played jazz standards beneath a soaring crystal chandelier, the music both intimate and distant, like something from another world. Emily stepped through the revolving doors, clutching her silver clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. She paused in the entryway, letting the scene wash over her. She could see her breath for a moment, left over from the cold outside, then she let it go and straightened her shoulders. Her blue gown shimmered in the soft light, the satin flowing over her pregnant belly, a symbol of hope, or maybe defiance. She knew everyone would look, and she tried to pretend she didn't care. A grand staircase swept down into the ballroom, where hundreds of guests mingled beneath draped garlands and twinkling fairy lights. At the base of the stairs, a photographer called her name. "Mrs. Bennett, over here." Emily tried to smile, but it felt brittle, a mask held together by willpower alone. Behind her, a couple whispered, their eyes flicking to her midsection, then away, embarrassed to be caught staring. She made her way to a table near the edge of the dance floor, grateful for the brief anonymity of the crowd. Here, under the golden glow of 1,000 candles, everything seemed beautiful, almost magical. The tables were draped in white silk, each set with glittering crystal and plates rimmed with gold. A massive ice sculpture in the shape of the New York skyline glistened at the center of the room, slowly melting as the night wore on. Emily's place card sat between the city's deputy mayor and the editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine. She smiled politely as they made small talk, their words blurring into a soft, meaningless hum. Someone mentioned a new Broadway show, someone else gossiped about the mayor's latest scandal. But Emily barely listened. Her mind kept drifting. Where was Chase? Would he come soon? Was he even thinking about her at all? Everywhere she looked, people wore masks. Glittering gowns and designer suits hid secrets, ambitions, and heartbreaks. Old rivals traded compliments through clenched teeth. Power couples posed for photos, hiding the tension with practiced ease. Every corner of the ballroom held a story, some romantic, some tragic, some far too close to Emily's own. She spotted Lily across the room, surrounded by admirers, her laughter ringing like a bell. It felt strange, watching her best friend float through the night, seemingly without a care. Lily wore a red silk dress, the color of confidence and danger. Her hair was swept up in a loose chignon, diamonds winking at her throat and ears. Emily tried to catch her eye, but Lily didn't look her way. The gala was a world unto itself, a palace built on secrets and glitter. The orchestra swelled, couples danced, and waiters refilled glasses before they were empty. A silent auction boasted luxury vacations and rare art. Upstairs, VIP rooms buzzed with negotiations that could change the fate of companies or families overnight. Emily wandered to the balcony for air. Outside, the city stretched forever, skyscrapers glowing like embers against the night. The muffled sounds of laughter and music floated up from the ballroom below. For a moment, Emily let herself believe she was alone, just another guest lost in the lights. But even here, she could feel the eyes on her, the questions, the judgment. She thought about the girl she used to be, simple, hopeful, unafraid. She thought about her mother's hands, rough from work but always gentle, about her father's quiet pride when she graduated high school, about the tiny apartment she'd once shared with her brother, both of them dreaming of better days. She missed those days, missed the simplicity, the honesty. Here, everything felt sharp, dangerous, unreal. A sudden burst of applause pulled Emily back to the present. The host was at the microphone, announcing the evening's big donors. She watched as the spotlight swept over the crowd, landing on Chase and Lily as they made their grand entrance. The room seemed to contract, all eyes drawn to the stunning couple at the top of the stairs. As they descended, the crowd parted. Photographers snapped, people whispered, and Emily felt herself fade into the background. She wanted to run, to disappear, but she stood frozen, her feet refusing to move. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Chase led Lily onto the dance floor, their movements smooth and practiced, a tableau of wealth and betrayal. For the next hour, Emily wandered through a maze of conversations, never quite part of any one group. She nodded and smiled, but the world felt muffled. Like she was underwater. The laughter seemed too loud, the lights too bright, every detail carved out of crystal and ice. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of Chase, always with Lily, always laughing. In the powder room, a group of women whispered in the corner. "Did you see? The best friend? Poor Emily." She ignored them, fixing her makeup with shaking hands. She wanted to scream, to break something, but she forced herself to breathe. The baby kicked again, a tiny, insistent reminder that she wasn't alone. By midnight, the ballroom was a blur of music and motion, joy and cruelty. For some, it was the night of their lives. For Emily, it was the end of everything she thought she knew. But under the chandeliers, in that world of glass and gold, something fierce was awakening in her. She was not the girl from Maine anymore. She was Emily Bennett. And her story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Chase Bennett wasn't born ruthless. He became that way, piece by piece, as the world taught him how quickly you could lose everything. His story was the kind people loved to tell at business schools and cocktail parties. The blue-collar boy from Detroit who clawed his way out of obscurity, who learned to trade humility for ambition, and who never let anyone see him bleed. By 38, Chase was already the CEO of a tech startup that had gone from a basement coding project to a $500 million enterprise. He had sharp eyes, quick hands, and a smile that people described as dangerous, the kind that promised you the world, then made you sign a contract for your soul. In public, he was charm incarnate. Gracious, quick-witted, always the first to raise a glass or diffuse a tense room with a joke. But in private, the pressure mounted like storm clouds in July. His company was growing, but so were the stakes. Rivals circled like sharks. Investors demanded more, always more. And at night, when he looked in the mirror, Chase saw not a victor, but a man running from shadows. For a while, Emily was his safe harbor. She was everything the city wasn't, soft, sincere, and steady. She'd been his greatest comfort, the only person who never saw him as a stepping stone or a target. In the early days, she made his tiny apartment feel like home. She cooked for him, cheered for his wins, listened to his midnight anxieties. He'd fallen in love with her laughter, her loyalty, the way she made him believe there could be more to life than just the next deal. But as Chase's star rose, his restlessness grew. Success bred paranoia. Each victory felt fragile, as if it could be stolen in an instant. He saw friends fall from grace, watched mentors get eaten alive by gossip, lawsuits, or bad investments. He promised himself he'd never end up like them. So he worked harder, stayed later, made riskier bets. The adrenaline was addictive, the sense that he was the master of his fate, that the city itself bent to his will. But ambition, Chase learned, is a double-edged sword. He started measuring himself by numbers: revenue, followers, luxury cars. He bought Emily a penthouse, then criticized her for not fitting in with his new circle. He wanted her to change, to be sharper, glossier, more like the women his colleagues brought to parties. He started to resent her sweetness, her small-town values, the way she seemed unimpressed by the trappings of success. Why couldn't she see how hard he was working for them? Why couldn't she just be happy? Then there was Lily. Lily was everything Chase thought he wanted to be. Confident, fearless, untouchable. She fit perfectly into his new world. Fast, ambitious, always a step ahead. With Lily, there were no awkward silences, no judgments about late nights or missed dinners. She challenged him, matched him, pushed him to take risks he would have shied away from with Emily. They talked in code, understood the same hunger, the same fear of being left behind. Lily made him feel alive in ways Emily never had, or so he told himself. Their affair began as a spark, a joke over drinks after a long day. It felt harmless at first. Chase convinced himself that he deserved it, that Emily was holding him back, that he'd earned a little excitement after all the sacrifices he'd made. When Lily started texting him late at night, he responded. When she confessed she'd always admired his ambition, he drank it in like water after a drought. He ignored the guilt, pushed it down with each new thrill. In truth, Chase's weakness was never just his ambition. It was the fear that no matter how much he won, it would never be enough. The boardroom victories faded quickly. The cars, the watches, the accolades, they all lost their shine. But Lily was new, exciting, a mirror that reflected back only his best side. With her, he didn't have to pretend to be the devoted husband, the responsible soon-to-be father. He could just be Chase, powerful, wanted, in control. Emily, meanwhile, became a symbol of everything he wanted to escape. Her pregnancy felt like an anchor, tying him to a life he'd begun to resent. The more her belly grew, the more he withdrew. Staying at the office later, finding reasons to travel, making excuses when she begged him to talk. He hated himself for it, but not enough to stop. Every time Emily tried to reach out, to save what was left of their marriage, Chase pulled further away. At the gala, Chase saw his two worlds collide. He told himself he didn't care who saw him with Lily. In fact, a twisted part of him wanted to be caught, wanted to force the truth into the open, to shatter the fragile peace he could no longer sustain. He convinced himself Emily would be fine, that she was stronger than she looked. But the truth was, Chase couldn't stand facing her disappointment anymore. He would rather be hated than pitied. When he walked into that ballroom with Lily on his arm, the adrenaline hit him like a drug. Cameras flashed, people gasped, and for a moment he felt invincible. A king in his castle, untouchable. But as the night wore on, he felt the cost of his choices settling on his shoulders like lead. The whispers, the stares, Emily's silent devastation, it all gnawed at him, even as he tried to brush it off. Chase told himself he didn't regret anything. But as the music swelled and the night spiraled out of control, he caught one last glimpse of Emily, standing alone, her hand on her stomach, dignity crumbling and still refusing to break. For the first time in years, Chase felt the tiniest crack in his armor. He looked away, because he knew what he'd become, and he knew he could never take it back. The moment that would haunt Emily Bennett for the rest of her life started with a single name echoing through the ballroom. "Mr. Chase Bennett, would you please join us on stage?" The host's voice cut through the music, drawing every eye to the couple standing in the center of the floor. It was as if the universe had choreographed the scene. casting Emily as the unwilling star of a tragedy she never wanted to audition for. Emily watched as Chase, still holding Lily's hand, smiled and nodded graciously. Lily, her best friend, her sister and everything but blood, squeezed his arm and flashed her most dazzling smile, drinking in the camera's attention. The room buzzed with excitement and confusion. People murmured in low voices, their heads turning back and forth between the glowing couple and the woman they all knew to be Chase's pregnant wife. For a split second, Emily thought maybe she'd wake up. Maybe this was a nightmare. Just her mind playing cruel tricks on her because she'd stayed up too late worrying. But there was no waking up. The pain was real, the hot, prickling humiliation that crawled up her cheeks, the icy dread that settled in her stomach, the sharp, insistent flutter of her baby, as if even her child could sense the disaster unfolding. The host handed Chase a microphone. "Chase, as one of our city's most generous young philanthropists, we'd love to hear a few words from you and your beautiful companion." He paused, eyes flicking from Lily to Emily and back, as if daring Chase to say her name. Chase didn't flinch. He didn't glance at Emily. "Thank you," he began, his voice perfectly steady. "Tonight is about new beginnings, about supporting causes that matter, and about having the courage to step into the future." He turned to Lily, his tone softening for just a moment. "And sometimes, that means recognizing when your heart leads you somewhere unexpected." The words landed like a punch to Emily's gut. Around her, the whispers turned sharper, slicing through the glitter and laughter like glass. "Isn't he married?" "She's pregnant, for God's sake." "Who does Lily think she is?" Some people tried to avoid Emily's gaze, embarrassed for her. Others stared openly, their curiosity tinged with glee. This was better than anything on Netflix, after all. Emily's mind reeled. She tried to focus on the tiny details, the way her champagne flute trembled in her hand, the cold sweat gathering on her back, the ache in her feet. Anything but the scene playing out on the stage. Then came the moment she'd remember in slow motion for the rest of her life. The event's photographer, sensing an opportunity for a headline-grabbing shot, gestured for Chase and Lily to pose together. "One more for the cover," he called. Chase pulled Lily closer, his arm slipping around her waist. They smiled for the camera, the perfect couple. And then, almost as if on cue, he kissed Lily's cheek. The ballroom erupted. A few guests gasped out loud, others simply stared in disbelief. The camera flashes captured everything. Lily's triumphant smirk, Chase's relaxed confidence, the look of utter devastation on Emily's face. It was a moment engineered for maximum destruction, and everyone knew it. For Emily, time fractured. She heard the click of camera shutters, the soft clink of glasses, the harsh whisper of her own name as it passed from table to table. She felt exposed, naked, as if every secret, every insecurity she'd ever had was now public property. She wanted to run, to hide behind the velvet curtains or melt into the marble floor. But she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by shock, by pain, by the terrible realization that the man she loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who didn't even care enough to look her way. The guest, sensing the drama's climax, leaned in. Emily caught snippets of conversation. He brought his mistress to the gala in front of his wife. "Poor thing, she looks ready to faint. This'll be all over social media in minutes." A few people tried to offer comfort, soft hands on her arm, sympathetic smiles, but their kindness only made the humiliation sharper. She was no longer a wife or a mother-to-be. She was a spectacle, an object lesson in how quickly everything could fall apart. Emily excused herself, the words catching in her throat. She hurried toward the exit, her vision blurring with tears. She almost made it, almost escaped the worst of it, when Lily's voice rang out behind her. "Emily, wait, don't go." For a moment the room froze. All eyes landed on the two women, the betrayed and the betrayer. Emily turned, her body shaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Lily?" she managed, the single word packed with every ounce of heartbreak and disbelief she felt. Lily hesitated. For the first time all night, her confidence faltered. "I'm sorry, Em," she said softly, but her apology sounded hollow, rehearsed. "It just happened. We didn't mean for you to get hurt." Chase didn't move to intervene. He stood by Lily, silent, unmoved, as if he'd already made his choice and would never look back. Emily nodded, a bitter smile breaking through her tears. "Of course you didn't," she said. "It never does." With that, she left, her head high, her hands shaking, her world in pieces. Outside, the cold air slapped her awake. She stumbled down the steps, her breath clouding in the darkness, the city lights blurring into gold and white. Her phone vibrated, dozens of messages, missed calls, news alerts. The story was already out. Tech CEO's pregnant wife publicly betrayed at gala. Her humiliation had gone viral, but beneath the heartbreak, a new feeling began to stir. A tiny ember of anger, of resolve. They had broken her in public. But Emily Bennett wasn't finished yet. She would survive this, and one day, the world would see her rise from the ashes. Emily stumbled out into the icy Manhattan night, her breath coming in ragged bursts, the sounds of the gala still ringing in her ears like cruel laughter. The shock of the cold air felt almost like a slap, a physical reminder that what had just happened wasn't a nightmare, but real, and the entire city had witnessed her world unravel. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, clutching her coat around her, her hands trembling. Somewhere behind her, the golden lights of the ballroom still glowed, and the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses all continued, untouched by her pain. The limousine she'd arrived in was gone. Of course it was. Chase must have sent it away, or perhaps he'd never planned for her to leave with him at all. She felt more alone than she had in her entire life. A few party guests lingered on the steps, their eyes darting toward her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Emily pulled her phone from her clutch, desperate for some connection, some escape. The screen was a flood of notifications, texts from acquaintances asking if she was all right, news alerts with her name in the headline, calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She turned the phone over in her hand and stuffed it back into her bag. There was no comfort in any of it. Emily walked for blocks, her heels echoing on the sidewalk, the night air biting at her skin. Tears blurred her vision, and she wiped at them with shaking fingers, afraid someone might see and recognize her. In this city, a million heartbreaks happened every night, but tonight, hers was on display for all the world to gawk at. She ducked into a quiet alley between two tall buildings, pressed her back against the cold brick, and slid down until she was sitting on the ground. That's when the sobs finally came, silent at first, then wrenching, her whole body shaking as she hugged her knees to her chest. The tears were hot, unstoppable, pouring out all the grief and shame and rage she'd bottled up inside for months. She felt her baby kick, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Not really, but even that was no comfort now. Her mind raced through every painful moment. The way Chase had looked at Lily, the pity in the guest's eyes, the sound of her own name whispered behind her back. She thought about the vows she and Chase had spoken, about the dreams they'd built together, the nights she'd lain awake worrying and loving him, believing that love would be enough. She'd given up her home, her job, her family in Maine. She'd made this city her own for him. And now, in a single night, all of it was gone. For a long time, Emily stayed there in the dark, letting the grief consume her. She thought of her mother's funeral, the years she'd spent taking care of her brother, all the sacrifices she'd made, believing it would all be worth it in the end. She'd always been strong, always the one who picked up the pieces and carried on. But tonight, she didn't want to be strong. She wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to go back to a time before her heart had known such agony. A distant siren wailed, and somewhere above her, a window slammed shut. The city moved on without her, uncaring, relentless. Emily pressed her face into her hands and cried harder. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice so small she barely recognized it. "What did I do to deserve this?" Time seemed to stop. The world shrank to the circle of light cast by a single street lamp, to the thump of her own broken heart. She felt empty, lost, as if her future had been erased in a single cruel gesture. After a while, her sobs quieted, replaced by a cold, gnawing numbness. She pulled her knees closer, shivering in her thin dress, and stared at the sidewalk, her mind blank. For the first time in years, she had no plan, no hope, no idea what to do next. The life she'd built with Chase, every memory, every promise, felt like a cruel joke. Emily tried to imagine what tomorrow would look like. Would she go home? Would she call her father and try to explain the unthinkable? Would she pack her bags and flee the city, run back to Maine and start over as if none of this had ever happened? The questions swirled, but there were no answers, only a vast, echoing emptiness. Her baby shifted inside her, a tiny flutter against her ribs, and Emily clung to it desperately. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry." She wondered if the baby could feel her heartbreak, if she'd already failed as a mother before she'd even begun. The hours passed. Emily didn't move. She was numb, a ghost haunting the city she'd once called home. Occasionally a car would drive by, its headlights casting long shadows across the alley, but nobody stopped. Nobody saw her. Finally, when the cold became too much, Emily forced herself to stand. Her legs were stiff, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She wiped at her cheeks, straightened her dress as best she could, and stumbled back onto the main street. She hailed a cab and climbed inside, giving the driver her address in a shaky voice. The ride home was silent. She stared out the window at the city's lights, watching them blur and smear as the car moved through the night. By the time she reached her building, she was exhausted, too tired to cry anymore, too hollow to feel much of anything. Emily let herself into the apartment she and Chase had once called theirs. The place felt foreign, stripped of warmth, every shadow a reminder of what she'd lost. She sank onto the edge of the bed, kicked off her shoes, and lay down without changing, the gown still cold against her skin. In the silence, the pain threatened to swallow her whole. But somewhere, deep inside, the smallest ember of resolve flickered, a stubborn, defiant spark that refused to die. She had lost everything, but she was still breathing. And tomorrow she would decide what to do with the ashes. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the bedroom, painting stripes of gold on the hardwood floor. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body heavy with exhaustion and the ache of heartbreak. The city outside roared on as if nothing had changed, but for her the world had cracked open. For the first time in hours, she took a deep, shuddering breath and forced herself to sit up. Her mind was raw, her heart battered, but somewhere under the pain, something different stirred. It wasn't just anger or sadness, it was a spark of clarity, a feeling she hadn't known she possessed. Maybe she'd lost Chase, maybe she'd lost Lily, maybe she'd lost the future she'd imagined. But she was still here. She was still Emily, and she wasn't as powerless as everyone thought. She got up, moving through the apartment like a stranger in her own life. Her hands drifted over the framed photos, her and Chase on their honeymoon, a picture of her holding a bouquet at Lily's wedding, a snapshot of her with her little brother on the coast of Maine. Each memory felt bittersweet now, but as she traced her thumb over the glass, she remembered what those moments meant. They were reminders that she had survived worse. She could survive this too. Emily showered, dressed in clean clothes, and brushed her hair back into a simple ponytail. She looked in the mirror, expecting to see a ruined woman, but instead she saw someone fierce, someone ready to fight. For herself. For her child. Her phone chimed. A text from her father, then another from her brother, and dozens more from acquaintances and friends who had heard about the gala. But there was one message that stood out. A short, formal note from a name she hadn't seen in years. "Ms. Bennett, your attorney's office confirms that the trust has cleared. Please call at your earliest convenience." Emily blinked, the words stirring a memory she'd buried deep. Years ago, just after her mother's death, her grandmother had sat her down with a stack of legal papers and told her the truth. Emily's family, the Palmers, weren't just humble fishermen and lunch ladies. Her mother had quietly inherited an estate from an old family line, a trust established generations before, filled with stocks, land, and investments that had grown into a small fortune. But her mother had never touched it. "Use it only if you ever truly need it," she'd said, "and use it to protect yourself." For years, Emily hadn't thought about the money. She'd lived simply, put herself through school, worked for everything she had. She'd never told Chase about the trust, never wanted her marriage to be built on secrets. But in the weeks before the wedding, her grandmother had passed away, leaving Emily as the sole heir to a legacy worth millions. And she'd done exactly what her mother asked. She hid it away. She wanted to build her life on love, not wealth. Now, everything had changed. Now the money wasn't a burden, it was a shield. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken as the pieces began to fall into place. The lawyer's office was in Midtown, tucked into an anonymous glass tower. She called, her voice steady. "I'm ready to access the trust," she said. The lawyer, Mr. Trot Whitman, greeted her warmly, already expecting her. "We're at your service, Miss Bennet. We have the paperwork ready. Would you like to come in this afternoon?" She nodded, her mind racing with possibility. She hadn't needed to be rich to be happy, but now she realized she needed power. To reclaim her life, to protect her child, to show Chase and the world that she wasn't the victim in their story. On her way to the lawyer's office, Emily felt herself changing. She rode the elevator in silence, remembering all the times she'd walked past these kinds of buildings and felt small. Not anymore. As Mr. Whitman ushered her into a private conference room and handed her the documents, she signed with hands that didn't shake. She listened as he explained the details, the investments, the accounts, the real estate portfolio in her name. By the end of the meeting, Emily realized her net worth exceeded even Chase's. She left the office with a new sense of purpose. No one at the gala, no one in Chase's world had ever guessed she was more than just a housewife. To them, she was a shadow, a pretty accessory, a gentle spirit, someone to ignore and discard. But she was so much more. As she walked the crowded streets of Manhattan, Emily let herself imagine the future. She could stay and fight. She could protect herself and her baby. She could take back everything that had been stolen. Her dignity, her dreams, her voice. By the time she returned home, the numbness was gone. In its place was something hot and bright and relentless. She opened her laptop, reviewing the details of the trust, the list of contacts her grandmother had left her, a renowned publicist, a discreet security team, connections to some of the city's best legal and financial experts. Emily realized she didn't need Chase. She didn't need his money, his approval, or his name. She had everything she needed to rebuild, stronger, smarter, and untouchable. The next day, she met with her new team at a private boardroom overlooking Central Park. They listened as she explained her situation, their faces growing serious as she outlined what had happened. "We can help you, Miss Bennet," her lawyer assured her. "You don't have to do this alone." Emily shook her head, a smile ghosting across her lips. "I know I don't, but I want to." For the first time, she felt powerful, not because of the money, but because she'd chosen her own future. The world thought she was weak, defeated, just another betrayed woman. But they were wrong. Emily Bennet was back, and she was just getting started. Something had fundamentally changed in Emily Bennet. Where there had been heartbreak, there was now a clear-eyed sense of purpose. The woman who had wept alone in an alley, who had spent a sleepless night lost in shame and grief, no longer felt powerless. The moment she signed those trust papers and walked out of her attorney's glass tower, she could feel the scales tipping. Her story was no longer one of victimhood, but of power reclaimed. The world didn't know it yet, but Emily was about to become someone they couldn't ignore. Her transformation began quietly. The first step was healing. She didn't run from her pain. She confronted it, let herself mourn what she'd lost, and then, little by little, decided what she wanted to build in its place. Emily started with the basics: eating well, resting, taking walks along the city's tree-lined avenues. She let the city's relentless energy wake her up again. Each day, as she watched the sun rise over the skyline, she promised herself, and her unborn child, that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. Then, the real work began. With the help of her grandmother's contacts, Emily assembled a discreet but formidable team. She interviewed publicists who specialized in repairing reputations, lawyers known for their ferocity in divorce cases, financial planners, and stylists who understood that presentation could be a weapon. She was careful, measured, and above all, strategic. For years, Emily had let herself fade into the background. Now, she stepped forward. She sat down with a stylist named Avery, an industry legend who dressed women for power, not just for parties. Avery listened to her story and nodded. "You don't need a costume," she said. "You need armor." Emily traded her soft pastel wardrobe for clean lines and bold colors. She learned the difference between blending in and standing out. Gone were the flowing dresses and ballet flats. In their place were sharply tailored blazers, crisp white shirts, and shoes that made her feel taller, more unbreakable. Her hair was cut into a sleek, elegant bob, easy to maintain, impossible to ignore. A light touch of makeup highlighted her eyes, making her gaze fierce instead of frightened. The change was more than skin deep. Emily also invested in herself. She read books about business, leadership, and negotiation. She signed up for workshops, networked quietly but purposefully, and began following financial markets and tech news, refusing to let herself be blindsided again. She stopped apologizing for her intelligence, her opinions, her ambition. It was amazing how quickly people's attitudes changed when she carried herself with confidence. At first, some friends and acquaintances barely recognized her. Others, surprised by her poise, quickly realized she was not someone to pity, but someone to respect. Emily didn't care about the rumors or the whispers that followed her after the gala scandal. She had spent enough of her life worrying about what other people thought. From now on, she was living for herself and her child. With her legal team in place, Emily quietly began to disentangle her life from Chase's. She froze joint accounts, documented every instance of financial mismanagement, and made sure her interests and those of her unborn baby would be protected in the coming divorce. She refused to take Chase's calls or respond to his increasingly desperate texts. She let her attorney handle everything. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her hurt again. But Emily's transformation wasn't just about leaving her old life behind. It was about becoming the kind of woman she wished she'd had as a role model growing up. A woman who refused to be broken by betrayal, who turned pain into power. She started volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing her story in small, private circles. She encouraged other women to protect their assets, to trust their instincts, and to demand better for themselves. Every time she spoke, she felt the support of the women around her. A silent army, stronger together. Emily also reached out to her family. She called her father and brother and told them everything, not the sugar-coated version, but the truth. They rallied to her side, promising their support, their love, and when she needed it most, their perspective. "You were always the strong one, Em," her brother told her. "You just forgot for a while." Soon, the invitations started coming in. Charity events, business networking dinners, even TV interviews. Emily accepted only the ones that aligned with her new values. She was no longer content to simply attend. She wanted to make a difference. She donated to causes close to her heart, started mentoring young women interested in tech and business, and made sure her voice was heard. Her presence at events became impossible to ignore. Where once she had hovered on the sidelines, now she walked into rooms with her head high, her shoulders back, her eyes bright with determination. And people noticed. One evening, a well-known CEO approached her at a gala, a real one this time, not just a backdrop for humiliation. He extended his hand, congratulating her on her poise and resilience. "Your story is everywhere," he said, "but the way you've handled it is inspiring. If you ever want to collaborate, my team would be lucky to work with you." Emily smiled, gracious but steady. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm just getting started." The old Emily, the one who had doubted herself, who had let other people define her worth, was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by pain, but defined by hope and courage. She was no longer just someone's wife. She was Emily Bennett, independent, powerful, and finally free. The city was buzzing about the upcoming gala, a massive charity event for children's education held at the Metropolitan Arts Center. Just months ago, Emily Bennett's name had been whispered as a cautionary tale. Tonight, it was on everyone's lips for a different reason. The press speculated about her transformation, her newfound confidence, and the mysterious power moves she'd made behind the scenes. Invitations to the event were so coveted that some people paid thousands for a table, just for a glimpse of Manhattan's most talked-about woman. Emily prepared with her usual discipline. Her team had handled every detail, from the sleek, midnight blue gown designed just for her by a top fashion house to the silent arrival in a private car. No paparazzi would catch her stumbling or unsure. But there was one surprise nobody expected. Tonight, Emily would not arrive alone. Ethan Cross was a legend in the world of business, older, brilliant, a self-made billionaire with a reputation for integrity and fearlessness. He had quietly mentored dozens of young entrepreneurs, never seeking headlines. When Ethan offered to accompany Emily to the gala, she almost refused, not wanting to use his fame as a shield. But Ethan had smiled and said, "You don't need protection, Emily. You need the world to see you're not fighting this war alone." The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, the atmosphere changed. Camera flashes exploded. All conversation seemed to hush as Emily and Ethan entered, arm in arm, her chin lifted, his presence a silent endorsement. Reporters called her name, desperate for a comment, but Emily simply smiled, a calm, steady smile that radiated confidence. Inside, the event was a swirl of wealth and influence. Every face turned their way. Chase and Lily were already there, surrounded by the crowd that once belonged to Emily. For a brief moment, she caught Chase's eyes from across the room. He looked stunned, then angry, then something else. Regret, maybe, or humiliation. Lily, next to him, looked pale, her smile faltering. Ethan led Emily through the room, introducing her to power players, CEOs, philanthropists, board members, who greeted her with respect, not pity. She talked easily about her new projects, her investments in women-led startups, her plans for a scholarship fund for girls in tech. No one asked about Chase or the scandal. No one needed to. She had already written a new story for herself, and the city had fallen in love with it. But Emily wasn't finished. As the evening reached its peak, the gala's host called for everyone's attention. Tonight, we'd like to recognize a woman who has shown extraordinary resilience and vision. A woman who, in the face of adversity, has chosen to lift others up. He motioned for Emily to join him on stage. The ballroom erupted in applause as she approached the podium. Emily took a breath and faced the crowd. The same world that had watched her humiliation now waited for her next move. She began, her voice clear and strong. Most of you know me for what happened months ago, when my personal life was broadcast for all to see. I was hurt, humiliated, and, for a while, broken. But I realized something important. No one can define your worth but you. Betrayal doesn't have to end your story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a better one. The audience listened, spellbound, as Emily continued. I stand here not just as someone's ex-wife, not as a victim of gossip, but as a woman who reclaimed her voice. I used my pain as fuel to help others, women starting businesses, girls who dream of a future in STEM, families in need of hope. That's what real power looks like. As she finished, applause thundered through the room, sincere, even emotional. Emily glanced down at Chase and Lily. Chase's face was stone, but his hands trembled. Lily looked away, her eyes shining with unshed tears. After the speech, the host invited Ethan to join her for a panel discussion about leadership and resilience. Cameras rolled as Ethan praised Emily's courage, calling her the future of this city's philanthropic world. In front of everyone, he announced a $1 million match for Emily's scholarship fund, turning her private mission into a public victory. But Emily's revenge was never about money or applause. It was about reclaiming herself, and about forcing Chase and Lily to see her, not as the woman they betrayed, but as the one who had risen above them. Throughout the night, she caught the way people looked at her, no longer with pity, but with admiration and awe. After the event, Chase tried to approach her, desperate for a private word. Emily met his eyes, her gaze calm, unwavering. I wish you well, Chase, she said, her voice soft but resolute. But I don't need you or your apologies anymore. She turned away, leaving him standing in the crowd, exposed and irrelevant. Later that evening, Emily and Ethan shared a quiet toast on the rooftop, the city sparkling below. You did it, Ethan said, lifting his glass. Emily smiled. No, I just started living. Everything else was just surviving. The city belonged to her now, not because she'd won a battle, but because she had rewritten the rules. Her story was no longer about betrayal or loss. It was about strength, dignity, and a revenge so public, so perfect, that it needed no cruelty, just the undeniable power of rising again and again on her own terms. A few weeks after the gala, as spring sunlight warmed the city, Emily Bennett stood before a packed auditorium at the Women's Leadership Summit. News of her comeback had become legend. Invitations poured in for her to speak, on podcasts, news shows, business panels. But this, tonight, was different. The room was filled with young women, some just starting their careers, others facing struggles Emily knew all too well. Every face was turned toward her, eyes bright with expectation, hope, and maybe even a little fear. Emily looked at this sea of women and felt something powerful rise within her. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, a small-town girl who happened to marry into a big life. But the past year had taught her that no woman is ever truly ordinary, not when she chooses to rise, to fight, to believe in her own power. She stepped up to the microphone, taking a slow breath, letting the moment settle around her. Her voice when it came was clear and strong, no trace of the woman who had once cried alone in an alley. "I want to tell you a story," she began. "A story about a woman who thought her world ended the night her husband betrayed her. She lost her marriage, her best friend, and for a while, she almost lost herself. But here's the truth. The real lesson I want to leave you with tonight. Your strength is never measured by how few times you fall. It's measured by how many times you choose to get back up." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of a young woman in the front row, a tear slipping down her cheek. "People will try to tell you what you're worth. They'll define you by your pain, your setbacks, or your silence. They'll expect you to stay broken. But you don't have to listen. Not for a second. You get to write your own story, on your own terms." The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew stronger as Emily continued. "I was told I was just a housewife? Just someone's wife, just a pretty face at a charity event. When my husband left me for my best friend, I thought that label would follow me forever. But what I didn't see then, and what I see so clearly now, is that our greatest heartbreaks can become the beginning of our greatest strength." She paused, the memory of that night at the first gala flickering in her mind. How small she'd felt, how defeated. And now, standing in front of these women, she felt infinite. There is no shame in feeling lost. There is no weakness in falling apart. But never let anyone convince you that your story is over because of what someone else did to you. The world wants you to play small, wants you to shrink yourself to make room for other people's egos, but you don't have to. In fact, you must not. Emily shared how she had rebuilt her life step by painful step, not because she was extraordinary, but because she refused to let anyone else finish her story. She talked about the nights she doubted herself, the mornings she woke up still hurting, and the days she forced herself to keep going for the sake of her unborn child. She spoke of the team she built, the new friendships she forged, the women she met at shelters and business meetings alike, who reminded her of the fierce, quiet resilience every woman carries inside. She explained how, when her daughter was born, she looked into those tiny eyes and made a promise. "You will never be told you are weak, or that your worth is defined by another's love. You will see from the very start that women are warriors, gentle when they choose, fierce when they must be, and never ever to be underestimated." The room erupted in applause again, and Emily smiled. This time, not just for the audience, but for herself. She remembered who she used to be. The woman who forgave too easily, who put everyone else first, who let other people's needs drown out her own dreams. She honored that woman because she had survived. But she also honored the woman she had become, the one who stood on this stage, unashamed and unstoppable. She closed with a message for every woman, no matter her past or her present. You are not weak. Your pain does not make you less, it makes you more. Let your heartbreak become your fuel. Let every betrayal become a reason to love yourself harder, to fight for your future, to take up space and use your voice. Don't wait for someone to rescue you. Be your own hero. And if you ever doubt your power, just look at the millions of women around you, standing up, speaking out, and proving every day that there is nothing more unstoppable than a woman who refuses to give up. After her speech, Emily was flooded with messages, some from strangers, others from women she'd met along the way, all saying the same thing. "You gave me hope. You made me believe I can start again. You reminded me that my story isn't over." Later that night, as Emily tucked her infant daughter into bed, she looked out at the city that had once seemed so cold, so unforgiving. She felt a peace she'd never known before. Not because her life was perfect, but because she'd claimed it for herself. She had been burned, but she had not been broken. She had learned to rise, to fight, and to lead. And for every woman who watched her journey, who saw her humiliation turn into triumph, who found a spark of courage in her story, Emily sent a silent promise. Your power is real. Your voice matters. Your future is yours to claim. As the city lights glittered and her baby sighed in her sleep, Emily knew this was only the beginning. Not just for her, but for every woman brave enough to write her own ending.